Your nan never bought stock cubes. She never needed to. The carcass from Sunday's chicken was already simmering on the back ring by Monday morning, filling every room in the house with something that smelled like it cost a fortune. It didn't. It cost nothing, because everything that would have gone in the bin was already in the pot. Somewhere between the arrival of the supermarket and the invention of the ready meal, Britain forgot an entire language of cooking. A language built on potato peelings and stale crusts, on leek tops and bacon rinds, on the understanding that a scrap is only a scrap if you lack the knowledge to use it. The 25 tricks in this video were standard practice in British kitchens for generations. They stretched a week's shop further than should have been possible, and most of them cost absolutely nothing to use. Food prices are only going in one direction, so before we start, hit subscribe. Because what your grandmother knew, you're about to remember. Let's count down from number 25. Number 25. Potato peel crisps. When your nan peeled potatoes for Sunday dinner, she did not throw the skins in the bin. She spread them flat on a baking tray, tossed them in a drizzle of dripping or lard, scattered a pinch of salt, and slid them into the top of the oven while the roast finished below. In 15 minutes, those strips curled and crisped into something the whole family fought over. The natural starch in potato skin browns faster than the flesh, creating a crunch that no shop-bought crisp could match. A tray of skins that would have filled the kitchen caddy became the first thing eaten at the table. 2 pounds of potatoes gave you enough peels for a generous bowlful. Cost? Nothing. Effort? Almost none. Number 24. Parmesan rind broth booster. This one came to Britain through Italian immigrants who settled in cities like Manchester and Glasgow, and smart housewives borrowed it fast. When the wedge of hard cheese ran down to its rind, nothing went in the bin. That tough, waxy heel was dropped straight into a simmering pot of soup or stew. Left to bubble for 30 minutes, it released a deep, savory richness that transformed thin vegetable water into something that tasted like it had been cooking since Tuesday. The rind did not melt. You simply fished it out at the end. But the flavor it left behind was real and generous. A rind your family would have discarded turned a 4-penny pot of leek and potato soup into something the neighbors asked about. Number 23. Stale bread croutons. A loaf going hard was never a crisis. It was an opportunity. Housewives cubed stale bread, tossed the pieces in a spoonful of dripping or bacon fat, scattered herbs if they had them, and baked on a high shelf until each cube turned deep golden and hollow-sounding when tapped. Floated on top of tomato soup or tossed through a salad of leftover greens, croutons transformed a pale, apologetic meal into something with substance. The secret was the staleness. Bread that has dried slightly absorbs fat differently to fresh bread, crisping all the way through rather than burning on the outside while staying soft within. A loaf that cost 9 pence in 1958 fed the family 4 times if nothing was thrown away. Number 22. Chicken carcass stock. First pattern break. Here is where the real money is. Your grandmother never bought a tin of Bisto chicken stock. She would have found the idea faintly offensive. The carcass left from Sunday's roast went straight into a large pot with cold water covering it completely. Onion halves, carrot stumps, celery leaves if she had them, a bay leaf, a few black peppercorns. She brought it slowly to a simmer, skimmed the grey foam off the top, and left it on the lowest ring for 3 hours. What came out was rich, glossy, deeply flavoured stock that set to a wobble in the fridge overnight. Every soup, risotto, gravy and stew for the following week was built on it. A chicken that cost 3 shillings in 1956 fed the family the roast on Sunday and the flavour on every other day. Food scientists now confirm that slow-simmered bone broth contains more collagen and minerals than any stock cube ever produced. Your grandmother was not being frugal. She was being correct. Number 21. Bacon rind smoky fat. The strips of rind cut from back bacon before the rashers hit the pan were never binned. They went into a cold cast-iron skillet set over a low heat, fat side down. Slowly, over 10 or 15 minutes, The rind released its fat and crisped into dark, brittle strips that crumbled like crackling. The rendered fat left in the pan went into a jar for frying eggs, sautéing cabbage, or finishing mashed potato. The rind itself, crumbled and scattered over soup or a bowl of lentils, added a smoky depth that transformed simple food into something memorable. A rasher of bacon that cost a penny or two gave three things: the meat, the fat, and the rind. Nothing left the kitchen unused. Number 20. Citrus peel sugar. When an orange or lemon had been squeezed dry, the peel went to work. Housewives sliced the spent rind into thin strips, laid them on a baking tray, and dried them slowly in the cooling oven after it had been switched off. Once completely dried, the strips went into a jar of caster sugar. Within 2 days, that sugar carried a bright, fragrant citrus oil through every grain. Used in shortbread, sponge cake, or simply stirred into hot milk before bed, it tasted expensive. The peel cost nothing. A jar of flavored sugar that would have been a luxury item in a fine grocer appeared in the kitchen for free. Your nan kept this jar going for months, adding fresh peel each time and using the sugar in everything. Number 19. Leek tops and greens in soup. The dark green tops of leeks were always cut away and put aside, never thrown away. Too fibrous to eat as a vegetable, they contained all the flavor of the pale white stem, but in a more concentrated form. Roughly chopped and added to any simmering stock or soup, they dissolved into the broth after 40 minutes, leaving behind a sweet, oniony depth. Celery leaves worked the same way. The outer stalks your family would not eat raw, too stringy, too bitter on their own, went straight into any pot of soup or stew. Cauliflower leaves, broccoli stems, the woody bases of asparagus. None of it left the kitchen, all of it built flavor. When every vegetable gave 2 jobs, the weekly shop stretched to places it had no right reaching. Number 18. Tomato paste tube savings. This one is more recent, but the principle is pure post-war thinking. When a recipe called for a tablespoon of tomato puree, the rest of the tube would harden and waste in the fridge within a week. Your grandmother's modern equivalent learned to portion a full tube into an ice cube tray, 1 tablespoon per section, then freeze solid. The cubes went into a bag in the freezer. Whenever a recipe needed tomato paste, 1 cube dropped directly into the pan. No waste, no hardened tube, no trip back to the shop for something you already had. At current prices, a tube costs over £1. A family that throws away half of every tube is throwing away 50 pence at a time, 50 times a year. £25 vanished before breakfast. Number 17. Jam jar, hot water pudding sauce. When the jam jar reached the point where nothing more would come out on a spoon, your grandmother did not rinse it and put it in the recycling. She added 2 tablespoons of boiling water, screwed the lid back on, and shook it hard. The residual jam dissolved into the hot water instantly, creating a thin, bright fruit sauce that poured beautifully over rice pudding, bread, and butter pudding, or a plain sponge. A jar of Robertson's strawberry jam in 1955 cost about 8 pence. Every last trace of it was used. The same worked for Marmite jars, golden syrup tins, and peanut butter pots. Your grandmother understood that the expensive part was already paid for. Getting the last of it out cost only 30 seconds of effort. Number 16. Bread crusts as a gratin topping. Bread going stale was processed into a resource before it had the chance to go moldy. Crusts and the ends of loaves were grated or blitzed into rough breadcrumbs, mixed with a scraping of butter, a pinch of salt, and whatever dried herbs were in the rack. Scattered over a macaroni cheese, a cauliflower gratin, or a fish pie, and browned under a hot grill for 5 minutes, those crumbs created a crust that crackled when the spoon broke through and protected the creamy filling beneath from drying out. Modern cooks buy panko breadcrumbs for over £2 a bag. Your nan made better ones from bread that was 3 days old and heading nowhere useful. Number 15. Herb stem stock edition, second pattern break. The part everyone throws away contains the most flavor. Bunches of fresh parsley, coriander, and thyme sold on market stalls were used leaves first, but the stems went nowhere. And this is the part food companies do not advertise, because it costs them nothing to tell you and everything to keep quiet about. The stems of soft herbs contain more essential oils per inch than the leaves themselves. Cooks at London restaurants discovered this in the 1980s and acted surprised. Your grandmother had been doing it since 1942. Parsley stems went into every pot of stock. Thyme stalks simmered in stews for hours, releasing their oils slowly into the cooking liquid. Coriander roots, if she had them, were crushed and added to curries. The flavor of a herb comes from the oil trapped in its cells. The stems have more cells. It is not complicated. It is just knowledge that supermarkets had no reason to pass on. Number 14. Leftover tea as a meat marinade. Cold leftover tea, too stewed to drink and heading for the sink, made a brilliant marinade for tough cuts of beef. The tannins in tea act as a natural tenderizer, breaking down the proteins in cheap meat in the same way an acid marinade does. A quarter pound of braising steak soaked overnight in cold tea with a splash of Worcestershire sauce and a sliced onion came out of the slow oven 2 days later, soft, deep-colored, and richer than the price suggested. Women's Institute cookbooks from the 1940s referenced this technique quietly, as though it were common sense not worth explaining at length. It was. Cold tea from the pot, destined for the drain, turned a tough, cheap cut into something that behaved like it had been hanging in a proper butcher's cold room for a fortnight. Number 13. Mushy pea water for soup base. When a pan of dried marrow-fat peas had finished soaking overnight, the cloudy water they sat in was poured off and kept. This starchy, slightly green liquid was added to the base of the next day's vegetable soup or used to thin a pot of lentils. The pea water added body and a mild, savory sweetness that plain water could never provide. The same logic applied to the water drained from boiled potatoes, which went into gravy for its starch and potato flavor. The water from cooked pasta went into tomato sauces, helping them cling to the next batch. Nothing that had spent time with food was treated as waste. Every pan of hot water that left a kitchen had given something to the broth, the sauce, or the gravy before it went anywhere near the sink. Number 12. Apple core and peel jelly. In autumn, when the allotment apple trees dropped more fruit than the family could eat fresh, your nan's answer was apple jelly made from nothing but cores and peel. After the apples were peeled and cored for crumble, the discarded scraps went straight into a preserving pan with enough water to cover. Simmered for an hour and strained through muslin overnight, the liquid came out pale gold and rich with natural pectin. Boiled with an equal weight of sugar, it set to a clear, trembling jelly that lasted months in the pantry. Served with roast pork or spread on bread and butter, it tasted like it had been made from the finest whole fruit. It had been made from the part you threw away. A pound of scrap apple peel set 6 jars of jelly. 6 jars that cost nothing but an afternoon and some sugar. Number 11. Parmesan breadcrumb mix for frying. Third pattern break. This is the one professional kitchens borrowed without acknowledgement. The stale, dry ends of bread that accumulated through the week were grated together with whatever hard cheese rinds remained. Parmesan, mature cheddar, old red Leicester, it did not matter as long as it was dry. The mixture of fine breadcrumbs and powdered cheese went into a sealed tin and lived in the fridge for 2 weeks without spoiling. Used to coat fish before frying, to top a shepherd's pie, or to bread chicken thighs before baking, it created a golden, savory crust that no bought breadcrumb could touch. The cheese gave fat and salt and umami. The stale bread gave structure and crunch. Together they produced a coating that would not have looked out of place in a Soho brasserie. A tin that cost nothing, made from scraps that were 1 day from the bin, lasted a fortnight and improved everything it touched. Number 10. Onion skin stock color. When onions were peeled for any purpose whatsoever, the papery brown skins went into a bag in the freezer rather than the bin. When stock day came, those skins went into the pot with everything else. They did 2 things. First, they added a mild sweet onion depth to the liquid. Second, and this was the trick your grandmother understood viscerally, even if she never had the chemistry to explain it, the dark pigment in the outer onion skin stained the stock a rich amber brown that looked like it had been simmering since Tuesday rather than Monday morning. Stock color sells meals. A pale, wan broth signals economy and effort. A deep amber stock signals Sunday. Those dry, papery skins that weighed almost nothing provided that depth of color for free. Number 9. Leftover porridge oat coating. Porridge made too thick, or simply too much of it, hardened in the pot overnight. By morning, it could be sliced into wedges, dusted in flour, and fried in a knob of butter until the outside crisped and the inside steamed soft and warm. But the greater trick was using dry leftover oats to coat fish before frying. Rolled oats pressed onto a herring fillet or a mackerel gave a crust that toasted in the pan to a deep, nutty gold. The texture was coarser than breadcrumbs and more interesting, with a faint sweetness that complemented the oiliness of the fish. Scottish fishwives had been doing this for generations before anyone called it a technique. A handful of oats from the bottom of a bag, too few to make proper porridge, became the coating on Friday night's supper. Number 8. Spent vanilla pod sugar. A vanilla pod used to flavor custard or rice pudding still contained enough fragrance for a second life. Rinsed and dried on the windowsill, it went straight into a jar of caster sugar and was left alone for a week. That sugar became vanilla sugar, fragrant and warm, ideal for shortbread, for dusting the top of a Victoria sponge, or for sweetening the cream spooned over fruit salad. In the 1950s, a single vanilla pod cost several pence and was a real luxury. Wasting one after a single use would have been unthinkable. Today, a pod costs over £1. The same principle applies. One pod, properly used, flavors sugar for 3 months. The jar is always ready. The scent, that warm, dark, almost floral sweetness, drifts out every time the lid comes off. Number 7. Coffee grounds, plant feed and fridge freshener. Used coffee grounds went into 2 places. First, the garden. Scattered around rose bushes and vegetable beds, they acidified the soil gently, deterred slugs, and added nitrogen as they decomposed. Second, the fridge. A small bowl of dry used grounds placed on the middle shelf absorbed the smell of raw onions, leftover fish, and yesterday's curry better than any commercial product sold in a supermarket. A box of bicarb in the fridge costs over £1 and does a similar job less effectively. Coffee grounds cost nothing because you have already paid for the coffee. In a country that has always drunk tea first and coffee second, this trick was relatively recent. But once known, it was never forgotten. Number 6. Bone marrow for roasting tin gravy. 4th pattern break. The most expensive flavor in the kitchen is already inside your Sunday roast. When the roasting tin came out of the oven after a leg of lamb or a rib of beef, the family saw meat, potatoes, and vegetables. Your nan saw something more important. The split bones beside the joint, the knuckle bones, the ribs themselves, each contained marrow. That soft, fatty tissue that turns translucent when heated. A teaspoon of marrow scraped out with a small spoon and whisked directly into the hot gravy in the roasting tin changed everything. It added a richness that no flour-thickened stock cube gravy could replicate, a depth that the drippings alone could approach but never quite match. Food writers in expensive London restaurants now charge for roasted bone marrow as a starter. Your grandmother stirred it into the gravy for free without thinking it deserved special mention. It was just what you did with bones. Number 5. Stale cake trifle base. When sponge cake went dry at the edges, or a batch of Swiss roll had been cut and left out too long, it did not go in the bin. It went into the trifle bowl. Stale sponge absorbs sherry, fruit juice, or raspberry jelly liquid far more efficiently than fresh sponge, drinking it in rather than sitting damply on top of it. The result was a trifle base that tasted more intensely of fruit and sherry than anything made from fresh cake could achieve. Women who turned out trifles at Christmas that drew gasps from the table were often working with sponge from the back of the tin, a couple of days past its best, that had been quietly soaking in medium sherry since the morning. The secret was not generosity with the ingredients. It was patience with the timing and thrift with the cake. Number 4. Chickpea tin water meringue. This one is genuinely shocking, And it works. The cloudy liquid drained from a tin of chickpeas, the water that gets poured down the sink without a second thought in most kitchens, whips into stiff white peaks with an electric hand mixer. Not soft peaks. Proper, glossy, hold their shape for hours, stiff peaks. Food scientists discovered in the 2000s that aquafaba, the water protein rich from cooking legumes, mimics egg white closely enough to produce meringue, mousse, and even pavlova. Your grandmother almost certainly poured this down the sink, but the principle that the liquid left over from cooking beans has value is deeply embedded in traditional British thrift cooking. Every tin of pulses in the cupboard contains something useful in its water. The waste was always optional, it was just that nobody told us. Number 3. Ham hock soaking water for lentil soup. When a ham hock had been simmered for hours until the meat fell away from the bone, the cooking water was intensely salty, deeply smoky, and amber-colored. Most modern cooks pour it away. Your nan treated it like currency. Cooled, skimmed of the excess fat, and tasted, it was often salty enough to use only in combination with plain water. But poured over red lentils with diced carrot and onion and set to simmer for 40 minutes, it produced a soup of such depth and body that it tasted like it had been made from a proper stock that had been going since the weekend. The salt in the water seasoned the lentils from the inside as they cooked, the smokiness from the hock penetrating every grain. A pot of soup that cost the price of a handful of lentils, built on water that had been destined for the sink. Number 2. Leftover mashed potato bread. When mashed potato went cold and thick in the fridge overnight, it did not heat up for a second round of mash. It went into bread dough. A cup of cold mashed potato added to a standard white bread dough in place of some of the flour produced a loaf with a tender, slightly chewy crumb that stayed soft for 4 days rather than going stale overnight. The starch in the potato held moisture inside the bread, keeping it from drying out the way a pure wheat loaf does by the second morning. The loaf rose higher, sliced more evenly, and lasted longer than plain bread. In kitchens where bread was baked twice a week as a matter of economy, this meant the second loaf was still worth eating on day 4. Leftover mash, usually the least inspiring thing in the fridge, became the secret ingredient that made the best bread on the street. Number 1. The perpetual soup pot. This was not a recipe, it was a system. And for generations of British housewives, it was the most powerful piece of kitchen knowledge they possessed. A heavy pot, usually cast iron, sat permanently on the back ring of the stove or on the warming plate of the aga, never fully emptied, never allowed to go cold. Every day it received whatever needed using. The water from boiling vegetables, the liquid from a tin of tomatoes, a handful of lentils, the last few spoons of yesterday's stew, a wilted celery stick, a leek top, a parmesan rind, leftover gravy that had thickened overnight, a bone from the butcher given for free because he always had more than the dogs could use. By Wednesday, the pot contained something that could not have been designed or planned. It had evolved. Each addition changed the flavor, but the continuous heat kept it safe, and the steady addition of new material kept it fresh. Ladled into bowls with bread that had been revived from yesterday under a damp tea towel in a low oven, it was dinner. Proper dinner. Filling and warm and deeply flavored, built entirely from things that would otherwise have been wasted. The perpetual pot was not a budget recipe. It was an entire philosophy. The understanding that food is not a series of discrete meals, but a continuous process, where nothing ends cleanly, where every meal gives something to the next, and where waste is not inevitable, but a failure of knowledge. Your grandmother kept that pot going every day of her married life. She never wrote the recipe down because there was no recipe. The recipe was attention and patience and the refusal to throw anything away before it had given everything it had. These 25 tricks cost nothing to use and almost nothing to learn. They ask only for the habit of attention, of looking at a peel or a rind or a bone and asking what it still has to give before it goes anywhere near the bin. That question, asked consistently across a week of cooking, turns food waste into free meals in a way that no supermarket deal or meal kit subscription ever could. Try one this week: the chicken carcass stock, the potato peel crisps, The jam jar sauce? Then tell me in the comments which one you're going to keep doing. Because once you start, you won't stop. Your grandmother couldn't. Neither will you.